you greetings from Pastor Chris as well. As you heard last week, he's taking this week off, resting his voice to be fully restored again, of course, with his voice. So keep praying for you, Pastor. Both campuses, let's lift up Pastor Chris in a prayer. And that's what the Bible encourages us to do in the Word of God. And also, let's keep our missionaries in our prayers. We send them up to Tanzania, Arusha and Tanzania this past weekend. And we believe we're going to see God move through our Reach Church team and Mission SOS that are joining with there. So pray with them. We believe for good reports in a week and a half when they're coming back home here to Texas. Also, speaking of reports, we just had our 5-day kids camp here at the Austin campus this past week. Yes, come on now. Listen, I'm going to tell you this, good reports. Last year, when we did this for the first time, we had 75 children showing up to be a part of the day camp. This year, we saw 177 kids come here for the 5 days from both campuses and from the neighborhood around. And on Wednesday morning, our kids pastor, Candice, she preached a message on salvation. And at the end, she made a very clear invitation, and she said, if you never given your heart to Jesus, if you never prayed a prayer like this before and you want to do it today, as I count to 3, lift your hand and listen now. 57 children lifted their hands and gave their life to Jesus this past week. Come on, isn't that worth celebrating? That's amazing. So I'm telling you now, if you happen to step in on a sticky gummy bear that we forgot to clean out, or get a little annoyed of the paint chips that fallen off of the wall in the hallway, hey, just take a deep breath. Remember the 57 kids that gave their life to Jesus. It's been a wonderful chaos here for a week. We're trying to restore the building back to its former glory again. But it's all worth it. It's all worth it. And I want to give a shout out and a huge thank you to the 60-something volunteers that came and gave of their time and their talent to make this a huge success. Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you that were part of this. All right, we're going to go back into our series on the Immortals. We are looking at biblical heroes and trying to find how we can connect with them and learn from their lives. And I'm going to start today with some heartbreaking statistics. It's from our nation that 50% of all Americans, so everyone in our nation, 50% are walking around with this feeling that God is mad at them. And even worse, 70% of all Christians are walking around with a sense of feeling and belief that God is disappointed at them, that they did something wrong, that they failed God. And I'm telling you, there is no worse thing than a sense of condemnation that will paralyze a Christian and paralyze the body of Christ. There's no worse feeling than you feel like you have betrayed or disappointed or failed someone that you truly love. So when we walk around with that feeling towards God, we are stumped and we are boxed in something. But listen, I have good news for you today. Because I believe whatever feeling you came in with today, if you feel like God is mad at you, or if you feel like you have disappointed God before the end of the message, I believe that you will walk out with a different feeling, and you will walk out with a knowledge that the Word of God says that God is for you. God is for you. That's the main point of today. And I believe we can learn that and see that very, very clear in today's Immortal. His name is Mephibosheth. And that's in 1st and 2nd Samuel. We're going to study the backstory to Mephibosheth because he's not that known when we talk about biblical people here. He was the grandson of the first king of Israel. He was the grandson of Saul, the first king. And Mephibosheth was born when Saul was already established king. So he was born into the palace and born into the royal family. And he was now third in line, because he was the oldest son of the oldest son to the king. So 2 generations, he would become the king. He was born to be the king. So he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He had everything a kid could ever wish for, lived in safety and wealth and fame there in the palace, and loved and spoiled little kid. That's who he was. And I believe now, as we study this story, we have to remember that Saul, he was not a good king. He was a very insecure and rebellious king towards God. And in his insecurity in his leadership, he felt threatened by this young shepherd boy named David. We know the story. David never tried to take the kingdom away from Saul, but Saul felt threatened, and he did everything in his power for the next 2 decades to kill David. Tried to kill him, eliminate him off of the planet. And I believe sometimes when Mephibosheth went to bed and King Saul was home in the palace, the grandfather would come in there and tuck him into bed, sit at the bedside and start to share those horror stories about about David. And he would talk about him and say, you know what, Mephibosheth, there is a usurper, there's a rebellion out there, there's this evil person, his name is David. And David is trying to come to steal everything we have. He wants to take the kingdom away from me. He wants to kill me, destroy me, and he's coming after you. So little Mephibosheth, he's terrified. They're going to bed late at night. And one night, his worst nightmare come alive. Because King Saul and his son Jonathan, the prince, they're out fighting the enemies. Not fighting David, but fighting the real enemies. And both of them the same day die on the battlefield. And when the news finally reaches the palace, it's the middle of the night when the messenger comes. And there's turmoil and panic in the palace because everyone in that court have believed the lies of the mad king. That David will come and have revenge on you because of me. He hates all of us. He's going to kill and destroy us. So this little boy, Mephibosheth, he's 5 years old when this happens. He's peacefully asleep in his bed, probably a sleep number bed, something expensive. And suddenly he's snatched out of his bed and brutally carried away in panic in the middle of the night. Still in his pajamas, still drowsy from sleep. His heart rate go up to 190 in a few seconds because all he can hear is the scream and the terror in people's voices as they say, run, flee for your life. David is coming to burn down the palace. He's coming to destroy us. So this little boy now is living his nightmare. Panicking in the darkness, no sense of what's going on, hearing that his dad is dead and everything. And then in the middle of the night when his nanny is carrying him in the wilderness, in the dark, she trips. And in the dark she drops the little 5-year-old boy and he's flying through the air. And he lands hard on some rocky ground. And the Bible tells us that he broke both of his feet in that fall. My son broke his arm a month ago and I was just devastated by the pain and what he went through. And that day when all of that happened, now imagine Mephibosheth breaking both of his feet. No doctor around, no time to sit down and tend to his foot or take care of it or put bandage. They just had to put him back up, snatch him back up and continue to run because they were terrified. So the Bible described that because of this, he was now for the rest of his life lame on both feet. So the first thing we will learn from Mephibosheth here, the first point of today, is that number one, he was dropped in life. And he's describing this story here in 2 Samuel chapter 4. And listen now, he had everything and he lost it all. And I believe now that this story and this part of the story may speak to you a little bit. Maybe you can see similarities what you've been going through in your life because the truth is that life happens to all of us. Maybe not to this extent, of course, or maybe it's been even worse for you. Maybe you grew up in a family and your parents really never took care of you and you feel like you missed out of something. Maybe you had a good friend in life that just turned their back to you and betrayed you in a horrible way. Or maybe you've been unfairly, unrighteously treated at your workplace. Maybe you're facing some financial hardship that it just feels like this mountain. You did not see them coming. Whatever that is, sometimes life happens. And maybe it's actions that other people did, but you are suffering the consequences from their actions. Just like Mephibosheth. Sometimes we are dropped in life. And when that happens, it starts to affect our faith and our relationship with God. This can so easily sneak into the heart. And we can start to question, why is God allowing this to happen? What is God's plan with this? And is God mad at me? Did I fail Him? Did I disappoint Him? Is He punishing me right now? And it's eating into our souls and lowering the self-esteem and self-respect and self-value in our lives. And we become a part of that statistics, walking around feeling that God is mad at me. believing that we disappointed God in some way. Mephibosheth did that. And eventually he made it to this refugee camp in the outskirts of Israel. It's called Lo-debar. And Lo-debar in Hebrew means nowhere. So they took him to nowhere. And that becomes his home for the next 10 years. So he went from the palace having it all to nowhere, to dirt floor, from the best food in the nation to barely any food, from his sleep number bed to sleeping on the floor. And he was living there. He had everything and he lost it all. And it starts eating on him. Together mixed with that fear that David will come after me. He feels like a failure. He feels hopeless. He's miserable. And he starts to grow bitter in his heart and his life, because how could this unfairness and injustice happen to me? And in his mind he's always thinking it's David's fault. David is mad at me. David is angry at me. David is coming after me to destroy me. I need to keep low. I need to hide. I need to try to find a way not for him to find me, because I'm terrified of him. And maybe we experience the same thing. I know we have. Maybe you're right now. But with our relationship with God, and we're trying to hide away because we feel like we've failed, that we are disappointed. Now we're going to take a pause in the story right here, because to understand the second half of Mephibosheth's life, we have to back the tape a little bit and go back in history. And we need to look at something that happened 10 years before Mephibosheth was born, to understand the end of his life. Because you see, number two, there is a covenant that Mephibosheth did not know about. And I'm going to explain this. In 1 Samuel 18, this is right after David as a teenage boy has knocked down Goliath and chopped his head off. I'm sorry, PG-13, but he's killing him, right? And then he's brought before the king and introduced to the king. And this happens in the next chapter. It says, after David had finished talking with Saul, he met Jonathan, the king's son, the prince. And there was an immediate bond between them. For Jonathan loved David. He loved him. And an immediate bond and instant friendship between those two teenage boys. And it became really good friends in a moment. And 2 verses down it says, and Jonathan made, everyone say, a covenant. He made a covenant with David because he loved him as he loved himself. He made a covenant. They became blood brothers. Now, the concept of covenant is somewhat forgotten in our modern Western world. We don't really understand what it is, but let me just briefly explain. A covenant meant that everything that I have now belongs to you. It's yours. You can have it. You have the right to come to my bank account, use my car, and eat from my fridge. It's yours as much as it's mine. A covenant was unbreakable. You could not just a couple of years later feel like, I feel like this is over. I'm going to walk away from it. No, it was for life. And you vowed, you pledged to always help, always serve, always assist, always protect the other person. That's the covenant in the Bible. Every time we read about covenants. And this is something that David and Jonathan had 10 years before Mephibosheth was born. So now, let's go back to our story. Mephibosheth, he heard the news about his dad and grandfather dying on the battlefield. He's bringing him to Lo-debar, out to nowhere. They drop him on the way there. He breaks both feet. He's paralyzed, the lame on both feet. And now he lives for the next 10 years in misery, in nowhere, hiding place, an isolated place, far away from where he belonged. And meanwhile now, of course, since the king died, David didn't kill him, but David was elected to be the next king. But now it took some years for that kingdom to be established. It actually took 10 years from the death of Saul until David finally established peace and his enemies was gone, and he could sit on the throne in Jerusalem and just finally reign as a king over the whole nation. And one of the absolute first things that he does after his kingdom is established, one of the first questions he's tending to, we find that in 2 Samuel chapter 9. This is right after his kingdom is established. He said this, David asked, is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show, everyone, kindness? Kindness for Jonathan's sake. The word kindness in Hebrew is chesed. Chesed can be translated, better translation is covenant love. So David is now stepping out. Finally, the first thing that he's thinking about is there's someone here that I can show unconditional love. Is there someone here that I can love as much as I promised to love Jonathan? Is there someone I can give favor and blessing and riches and everything I have to because of Jonathan? He didn't know Mephibosheth was still alive. But one of the servants stepped up and say, Ziba answered the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He's lame in both feet. And David gets so excited. Where is he? The king asked. And Ziba answered, he's at the house of Machir. He's in Lo Debar. And David, the king, gets so excited. Because just like God, he's just yearning to show someone kindness and to give freely based of the covenant. So he's sending his soldiers away to find him in this outskirt of Israel and bring him to me. Bring him to me. I want to show him kindness. So eventually they get to Lo Debar. They find a house where Mephibosheth now has been living for 10 years. And Mephibosheth's perspective now, he hears this hard knock on the door. And he hears someone calling his name. Mephibosheth, the king, is requesting your presence. And when he hears that, his heart is sinking in his body. Because what he hears is a death sentence. His mind is so skewed. His experience is so wrong. His what he thought was fact has been lies in his life for his entire life. So now what he hears is that the king finally found me. He's going to judge me and destroy me. And I believe that happens to you and I sometimes. When God is looking for you. When we've been away for a while. And we have that knock in our heart. We feel that voice calling your name. Maybe through a message like this. And we just want to hide because we cannot even understand how God could accept us back to His presence right now. I've done so many terrible things. I disappointed Him. I failed Him. And He's calling my name. He's calling me now to judge me for all I've done. And Mephibosheth has no choice. He has to come with the soldiers, joining. And he's limping in on his crutches before the king, terrified. He's wearing rags as clothes. Hasn't washed his hair in 10 years. And he's reeking, stinking, shivering before the king. And he believed, this is my last moment. And this happens. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. And David said, Mephibosheth, I am your slave. He replied. He was terrified. He did not know what was coming. But here's what happens. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you, everyone, kindness. It's the kindness of God that draws people to repentance. God is yearning to show His kindness. He wants to give His kindness. He's a good Father. And every good gift comes from above, from Him. There's no shifting between darkness and light in God. He's light and He's good in everything He does. I want to show you kindness, David said. Why? For the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will, everyone, restore. God is in the restoration business. He want to take that was empty and broken and dead, and He wants to bring life back into it and restore it back to its original intent. I will give you back everything that belonged to your grandfather, and you will always eat at my table. So here's the point that we started with, that we're going to end with. God is for you. Just like David was for Mephibosheth at all times, Mephibosheth didn't know it. And when he finally comes before David, thinking that he would be judged and punished, then David speaks life into him. And he tells him the truth. He's saying, listen, I will restore you. I will give back everything to you. I want to love on you and be kind to you. Not because of your good deeds. Not because that you have everything right in your life. No. For the sake of the covenant I had with your father, I will give you the love I gave him. And I know you lost your dad now, so I will become your father. You will become my son. And you will eat at my table. Mephibosheth could not believe what he heard. He thought, he was certain that he came to be punished, to be tortured for the sins of his grandfather. He was at the rock bottom in his low self-esteem and self-value. He calls himself a dead dog before the king. I'm just a dead dog. Why would you do this to me? But when he finally looks up and looks into the eyes of the king, he sees this radiating love coming towards him. And he knows it's all true. And the worthless, useless, hopeless, depressed, filthy failure of a young man living in hiding, living in darkness, reeking, he's restored to be a son of the house of the king. And he can now eat at the king's table. I believe that night when they gave him his first bath in 10 years. They shaved his face, they cut his hair, they dressed him in a royal robe. And he was limping in on new crutches into the dining hall. He came a little late because it took some time for him to walk. And David is sitting there. The king is there with all his sons. And as soon as he walks in nervous and still a little scared, David stands up and he says, Mephibosheth, come here, my son. Come and dine with your family sons. This is the son of Jonathan I've been telling you about. My best friend's son. Now he's my son. Receive him as your brother. And he dined with the king for the rest of his life. May I preach to you for just a minute here? I can't help it. Listen, that was me. I was a dead dog. I was filthy. I was reeking of sin and shame. I was a failure dropped in life. That's who I was. But one day, in an instant, in 1 second, not because I deserved it, but because He's good, Jesus found me. I didn't even find Jesus, but He found me just like David found Mephibosheth, and He lifted me up of that place. He washed me clean. He dressed me in His royal robe of righteousness and invited me into His kingdom, not as a slave, not just as a servant, but as a son in the house. And He gave me eternal life and eternal value. And I learned something fairly quick on my walk with God as a teenager. I learned that I am valuable, and I learned that I am a son of God. And I'm not that because of my great achievements, not because of my great deeds in life. No, not because of my lack of sin and mistakes. No, I had all of that. But He restored me because of the covenant God made with me through His Son, Jesus Christ. And you say, lucky you. No. I'm preaching about your life right now. There are far too many Mephibosheth Christians in America today. Living in a place of nowhere. Living in lack. Living in poverty. Living in filth. Believing that God is mad at them. Believing that God is disappointed at them. And afraid to even approach God. And they think this is my lot in life. Listen now. God is not disappointed at you. God is not mad at you. God is not against you. God is for you. And if God is for you, who can be against you? He's not mad at you. God is mad about you. And He's inviting you to His table today to eat of all of His dishes. He wants to restore you. Not because of your greatness or my greatness, but because of the covenant He made. He wants to lift you up. You may have been dropped in life, but God is here to lift you up today. You may have lived in a place called Lodebar, a place of nowhere, isolated place spiritually. But God is here to call you out today. He's here to restore to you the life He gave to you and dress you in the right clothes, give you new life, new hope, declare your value over your life. God is in the restoration business because He proved it to us. He gave His Son when we were yet sinners. He proved His life for you and for me. And if God did that when we did not know Him, when we were still reeking of sin, how much more will He not give you today when you ask Him for it? So I'm asking you today, do you hear it? He's knocking on that door right now. And it's a hard knock because He's desperate to show you His kindness. He's calling your name right now. He's saying, come out of Lo-debar. That's not your place. You're saved. You're my child. You don't have to live there. Come out of that darkness. Come out of that filth. Come out of that misery. Come out of that pain. Come into freedom. Come into my kingdom, my marvelous light. He wants to restore you, and He wants you to eat at His table. And we can receive His help and His promises today. And I believe that's what we learn from Mephibosheth in this story. Come on, let's give God a big hand for His word today.